British politics, eh? Bit of a mess. How did it all happen? Well, if you'd like to find out, why not join us for the next 15 episodes as we see how British politics got from state consensus to, well, this. Actually, Alex, I know I said College Green would be a great place to film, but I don't actually like it here. There's not a soft lit white backdrop and desk that we could film this at, is there? Maybe with a wee model of Big Ben and a House of Commons notepad?
Say no more.
Gosh, that's much more like it. And the audio's improved too. I guess that's why they filmed the moon landing indoors. Yet, no amount of softbox lighting can protect you from political crises. And we here at Elections generally think the only way to understand our current political mess is to understand the series of messes that led to it. So why not join us as we look at British general elections from the passing of the Representation of the People Act in 1918 all the way up to Brexit and beyond. Alex, roll titles.
Okay.
We really need to work out how to do that in post.
Everyone's a critic.
No, I know what you want, you saucy wonks. You want me to jump straight to Harold Macmillan hiking official bank rates in 1958. But we can't just jump straight to the fun stuff, can we? We've got to make sure everyone's up to speed on how the British government works. Of course, if you know all that already, you can just click here to jump to the next episode. So for our purposes, we're going to start in the 20th century.
Wait, what about the Magna Carta and the English Civil War?
Yeah.
The whole thing was putting politics
I know,
in historical
but
context.
they'll know all that, won't they? They'll have heard it before.
I mean, maybe, but will they have heard it in song?
We need to plug it in. A 1, 2, 3, 4. First came the Normans, outperforming in year of our Lord in 66, the result of which is a barons rich and laid there for politics. Crime was solved, but he had to go bothering nobles if he wanted things done. With a bad King John, it all went wrong. They spoke discordantly fun. Way!
Faster! Cockneyer!
I'll try. Picture the scene in 1215 on the muddy fields of Runnymede. The barons marred the Magna Carta, listing powers for John to see. Jumped 400 years and the Cavaliers were defending Charles I. He lost his head and Cromwell that he was right, but still the worst. Hey!
Call that Cockney?
I can't play the piano, Alex.
Hey, you can't sing either.
Try harder. When all of it died, they said we tried, but to a great tyranny, we'll get till the sun, keep him under thumb, and call it constitutional monarchy. So over time, the crown declined until a Medicine Bull. The PMs arrived, the powers arrived, the first one called Hey! What?
We have to stop. We've just got this cease and desist letter from Gilbert and Sullivan.
What, the songwriters?
No, the solicitors.
Oh damn, they've got us this time. History's boring anyway. This is a politics channel.
Part 1. Explaining the House of Commons.
The House of Commons is the lower house in the British Parliament, and at the time of me holding up this newspaper, is composed of 650 members of Parliament. It is much more power than the upper house, the House of Lords, which is composed mostly of people with special knowledge and experience of donating to political parties.
Oh, hey.
Way back when, the Commons and the Lords were practically co-equal chambers. The Lords' power waned gradually over time. Of course, the actual breaking point for the Lords' power over the Commons came in 1909 with Lord George's peace. What was that?
Off topic.
What do you mean?
Every time you drift off topic, I'm going to pelt you with the off topic ball.
I didn't agree to that.
Yeah, well, I didn't agree to any of this. Go back to describing Parliament.
Fine. Basically, all you need to know is that the House of Lords can only delay and advise the Commons on legislation. It can't overrule it. That's because the Commons is the one that's supposed to have the mandate from the people.
Now, was that so hard?
Yes.
Part 2. Elections.
Generally speaking, general elections happen once every 5 years, but the practice is a lot more complicated than that. In the 20th century, there were 2 years which had 2 general elections, and a decade almost without any elections at all.
Spoiler alert, it was World War II.
Westminster general elections are still contested under first past the post, where each voter gets one choice and no further options, and the candidate with the most votes wins. It's first past the post that accounts for the occasionally striking disparity between national vote share and the composition of the House of Commons. Defenders of first past the post argue that it creates a strong link between voters and their local constituency MPs, and that voters are empowered by the system to kick the bastards out, i.e. that small swings in marginal seats can result in complete changes in government. Some also argue that first past the post results in more stable governments than the coalitions produced by proportional systems, Although, as we'll see in practice, this isn't always the case.
Isn't that right, Alex?
What? Sorry, you were going on a bit.
Are we watching someone else?
No, never.
Unbelievable. Well, either way, once elected, how are the levers of power actually pulled?
Part 3. How to win friends and govern people.
For all our talk of the Prime Minister, they're not actually directly elected. They have to stand to become an MP just like everyone else. After an election, the Palace approaches whichever MP has the confidence of the House and invites him to form a government. This is usually the leader of the largest political party. After an inconclusive election, who the Palace approaches is not determined by the monarch herself, but by the civil service and by soundings taken from senior parliamentarians. It looks like this.
Who has the common support? I shall inform Her Majesty immediately.
It's a wonderful system. As a result, the Prime Minister owes their support not to a personal mandate, but the support of other MPs. Chief among the Prime Minister's powers is the ability to hire and fire ministers. MPs chosen to become ministers are called frontbenchers, and those not are called backbenchers, owing to the differing styles they use while repping mad games with their workout fury crews.
What?
Alex is telling me that it actually refers to where they sit in the Commons, and that what I said doesn't even make sense in the context of a gym. I don't go to the gym. Note that the Prime Minister's ability to fill their cabinet with MPs is one of the key differences in the Westminster model to, say, for example, the US Constitution. This gives the Prime Minister a great deal of control over the development of MPs' careers. Party whips use this to ensure that MPs behave the way their Prime Minister wants them to.
What's a party whip, Michael?
Glad you asked, Alex. A party whip is an MP who works for the government but isn't a minister. It's their job to ensure that MPs vote the way their party wants them to. Of course, the popular conception of party whips imagines them filling dossiers full of extramarital affairs and hookups that the MPs have been getting up to. But the reality is quite different. Usually knowledge of MPs' financial misdealings is more than enough to keep them in line. And even if you're squeaky clean, whips can always threaten MPs with deselection. This means removing their party's backing at the next general election. It can effectively end a political career for any MP, and is usually enough to make sure they vote the way they want them to. But before you go thinking that a Prime Minister's power is unlimited, remember that Westminster's fusion of executive and legislature makes it much easier to remove a Prime Minister that MPs have lost confidence in. Certainly, it's a lot easier to remove a bad Prime Minister in Westminster than it is to remove a bad President in Washington. Get away, you rat!
Part 4. Did someone say constitution?
British constitution relies on three things. Thing number one is precedent, what previous governments have done. Thing number two is statute, like the Fixed Term Parliament Act. And thing number three is convention. Convention is essentially the hope that parliamentarians will act like fairly sound chaps. It is convention that prevents the Prime Minister from simply sending Parliament on a permanent holiday, and stops the Speaker from expressing political views. Most democracies rely on convention to some degree, but Britain is particularly dependent on it. This partly stems from the period in history when British politics was a kind of parlour game played by gentlemen from the same class and with broadly similar interests, which looked like this.
Shall us tax the windows? Excellent, I shall inform Her Majesty immediately.
Yet there are more theological reasons for this institutional peculiarity. Britain has never had a lasting revolution or a single declarative constitutional moment that Lin-Manuel Miranda could write a musical about. This means that to this day, legal power is not derived from the consent of the governed or any of that nonsense, but, legally speaking, from the divine right of the monarch to govern their kingdom however they wish. Of course, these days, it's elected MPs in the Commons who exercise this power, but nevertheless it does raise an interesting constitutional pickle. If Parliament is absolutely sovereign, i.e. if Parliament can do whatever it likes, can it pass a law that binds itself? In the UK, the courts have generally answered this question with no, which is why no government has ever been able to pass a written constitution, even if it would like to. The key point is that British politicians can't pass a law that binds themselves. On a side note, this is why it's not possible to have a legally binding referendum in this country, because it... Fair enough. Anyway, all this talk about Parliament's absolute sovereignty is really only the theory. Part of the story of British politics in the 20th century is seeing how Parliament came to accept constraints on its power, either by devolving power to regional parliaments, by passing human rights legislation, or accepting that some powers would be held at a European level. Although I guess we won't need to worry about one of those anymore.
Okay, I think think that's enough background.
Oh, thank God. Now we can finally hit the hard pause. Although before we do, here's a word from my honourable and learned friend Alex on the thorny issue of political bias.
Part 5. A word from my honourable and learned friend Alex on the thorny issue of political bias.
Oh, hi there. Just catching up on a little light reading. Now, throughout this series, we're going to try and be as balanced as possible, but we recognise that biases, both conscious and unconscious, may creep into our perspectives from time to time. As such, we thought it best to be honest and upfront at the start about what those biases are. We're both chaps, we're both whiter than the frosty peaks of hell, and we're both from Northern Ireland. We both voted Remain in the European referendum.
And we do it again, damn it!
And previously we've both supported Labour. In fact, our desk man Michael used to work for a Labour MP and also worked for their Northern Irish sister party, the SDLP, who you've probably never heard of.
Hey!
Get over it. As I say, this isn't a party political broadcast, and we're going to try and be as fair as possible to everyone, even scumbag Tories. But take everything we say with a little pinch of salt. And if you do happen to come from a different political tradition, why not keep watching and leave an abusive message in the comments below? That way, we can both learn. Back to you, Michael.
Thanks, Alex. So, join us next time when we'll be looking at the uncannily familiar world of British politics in the 1920s and 30s. And if you enjoyed this episode, why not like and subscribe? Or better yet, send us a small postcard featuring a collage of Midland wildfowl.
I'm telling you, man, you're the wrong side of Pitt the Younger.